Great. Canoe22, welcome to the Kriegsspiel Umpiring chat show.
All right, thanks for having me.
Really appreciate the time. We're going to talk about your most recent game. You just completed the second Battle of Osgiliath.
Yeah.
Talk about, so where did you get the inspiration for this? Is obviously from the Lord of the Rings. Are you a big Tolkien fan? Are you a fantasy fan? Or
Yeah.
what's your inspiration?
Well, I've seen the movies. I've read the books. I read the Silmarillion, which
You did.
wasn't a thrilling read, but I read it.
Man, that's a
Really,
brave thing. I own the Silmarillion and read portions of it.
yeah.
Right.
No, going through the whole thing's quite the
Yeah.
chore.
I noticed you call yourself one of the god figures, right? Iluvatar.
Yeah, Iluvatar.
Yeah,
He's like the main over
the
god in
main,
Tolkien's
yeah,
Legendarium. Yeah.
the main deity. Okay, so you read through.
Uh,
What was it? What got you interested in trying to now create a Kriegspiel out of this one? I guess it's a takeoff of the battle from the book, right?
yeah. So Uh, I've also been a pretty long time player of the Games Workshop miniatures game, like Middle Earth Strategy Battle Game, which
Okay,
is miniatures game based on the Lord of the Rings. So, sort of some of the inspiration came from that as well.
got it.
I wanted to try to apply sort of that commercial rule set that I knew very well. I've played it a lot,
Right.
and I wanted to try to convert that into a Kriegspiel format as sort of something more unique to try.
Cool.
Uh,
Well, we'll talk about that. How did you find that conversion process? What was the parts that were easy and what parts that were surprisingly hard?
yeah, so one of the easiest things to translate was the combat. The way
Yeah.
that combat gets resolved, I didn't have to touch any of that. Um, most of the things that have to change when it comes to adopting commercial rule sets are those little like special rules and game mechanics side of things. Um, because in a Kriegspiel, you don't have your players saying in their orders, oh, I'm going to use this ability, right?
Right.
So you have to abstract a lot of that and figure out either how you can translate it into something that works well or just cut it out entirely.
Right. A lot of those mechanics are made for two people sitting over a table and they're made to kind of
Yeah.
artificially introduce fog of war, card
Hmm.
mechanics, things like that, use of powers that you kind of keep in a satchel, then you reveal them. So they're all fake fog, not fake, they're fog of war mechanics trying to put where everybody can see everything. And so when you have fog of war naturally
Hmm.
in the format, you don't need those mechanics.
No, no.
Yeah. Okay. And so what were some examples of things you decided to keep that weren't necessarily the combat? Was there anything you were able to salvage?
So combat movement, I could keep sort of the
Okay.
same. I found I needed to extend a lot of the ranges compared to the miniatures game because the game's intended to be played on a certain size table. So when I expanded it to the table I used for the Kriegspiel, I think that table is something like 5 or 6 times larger than a standard uh, table
Okay.
for that game. So just for the economy of the time and for the players, I needed to extend movement and I needed to figure out ways to make that feel longer without it feeling too long.
Right.
And a lot of that was just by feel. So before this game, I did run a test game with a couple players just by invite to test a lot of the mechanics. And one of the biggest things I had to iron out over the course of that test game was movement ranges.
Okay. And what did you find?
Um, Pardon?
What did you find in the movement ranges? It sound like you were able to use them partially, right?
Yeah, I I found that if I used some of the mechanics that let you speed up in the actual game and translated them into being like, okay, well, if they're marching in a column, perhaps I'll give them a bit of extra movement,
Okay.
or
Yeah.
if they're not, for this game, if they're not like navigating through ruins and having to step over debris and stuff, I'll extend it a bit more. So it sort of turned into more of a system where I was applying modifiers to the movement
Right.
depending on the situation, as opposed to the more static movement of the board game.
Okay. That's great, and that's part of the flexibility that you have in Kriegsspiel is you are
Hmm.
the modifying force. What was its approach on combat?
So the way the game breaks down combat is it splits them off into individual models. So when two models are in contact, they fight, they roll off, and the winner gets to try to kill their opponent.
Right.
So when you translate that into a Kriegspiel format, since I was modeling each individual model on the board, it wasn't, I could basically just port it over one to one. I didn't have to change very much about it. Of course, the consequence of this is that this system almost certainly could never be played in a live format because combat takes a while to resolve
Right.
because you're rolling for each model. But in play by post, um, it gives you a bit more granularity, especially when you end up in small combats between 10 versus 10.
So a roll off means two six-sided die, or how does a roll off
Yeah.
work?
So it depends a bit.
Sure.
For a basic warrior, each side, yeah, they'd roll a six-sided die. The higher number rolled wins, and then each troop they each have their own profile, with stats, etc.
Uh-huh.
And if it comes to a tie, then the more skilled infantry or the more skilled troop will win out because they have like a higher fight value. It's called in the format.
Okay. Got it. So if you had take the example of the 10 that you just mentioned, you'd have to roll
Hmm.
10 separate sets of die to see who won those 10 different
Yeah,
combats, or use
yeah,
10
yeah.
die, right? Okay. And then how did you keep that straight in terms of, like, if you had a line of two groups fighting, just mechanically, how would you do that? Would you roll them one at a time?
Yeah. Usually, I'd break them up one at a time.
Okay.
So I'd take like two die. I'd roll it. I'd see who wins, and then I'd roll the strike to see if they wound or kill their
Yeah.
opponent,
Okay.
uh, back them away, and then move on to the next one.
And now, do you use
Uh,
what do you use for the actual mechanism? Do you use Tabletop Simulator, or what's the actual die
yeah,
rolling?
so the whole game was run in Tabletop Simulator.
Okay.
I used the dice simulation in that.
Okay.
Um, I do have some problems sometimes with. I feel like Tabletop Simulator doesn't quite roll your dice, uh, roll them completely. Like it'll toss them a little bit, but not actually totally roll them. But I didn't
Right.
want to have to open a separate program to roll like on say a Google Dice form or something like
Yeah.
that.
Fair enough.
So I kept it all. I kept it all in Tabletop Simulator for
So
that.
now, just to give some context, as you were doing individual models, because I did have a chance to look at your the numbers on each side. It was a
Hmm.
small number of the battle, right? It was 300 versus
Yeah.
300, roughly.
It was even less than
Less
that. I
than
think
that.
it was 130 versus 170 or
Got it.
something.
Okay, so I
So
was fixated on
300
the whole,
total on the
300
table.
total ish, so 330. So by doing individual models, you had 330 ish total in the
Hmm.
battle, so that wasn't unreasonable. And then how many individual fights would you have to resolve per turn roughly? Would it feel like you in the middle of it?
Yeah, so that really depends. Of course, in the first few turns of the game, it was nothing because
Sure,
nobody was fighting yet.
sure.
But as things heated up, I could end up resolving upwards of maybe 15, 20 combats in
Okay.
a turn.
Yeah.
Um, but it gets pretty quick once you because a lot of it will just be like one dice versus one dice.
Right.
Things get more complicated when you have like the commander characters in the fight, or
Right.
if you've got a rank of spears, two ranks, you get an extra dice and so on.
But you had 8 players per side, which is a nice number. In my opinion. How did
Yeah, it was
you?
it was a bit more than that.
What was
I
it?
had
Talk about that. How many players do you have total?
Yeah, so I had 8 on Gondor's side and then 11
Oh,
on the Mordor
perfect.
plus allies side.
So
Yep.
how did you come up with that order of battle? Because you're pulling from a fictional book, and I imagine there's some materials out there. Was an order of battle that you were able to use from one of the rule
Yeah.
systems?
So there's no like order of battles online or anything.
Right.
The order of battle was pretty difficult to come up with, but I started first by sort of looking at some of the sources and seeing like who was present. I wanted to figure out like which characters were actually there, who I could use, and I sort of altered it a bit. Some of the characters that I put in the game weren't technically there
Right.
in the books or in the movies, but I put them in there just to sort of pad out the number of commanders that I had in the game. But I wanted to use a variety of troops. I didn't want just have like 100 of the same soldier versus 150 of the same orc. So I wanted to make use of a lot of the variety that there is
Sure.
in the miniatures game.
So
So
even on the Gondor side, I saw you had like six different variety. You had a variety of types of troops that were on the
mhm.
Gondorian side as well, right?
Yeah. So, veterans, regulars, and
Right.
then sort of a lot of the specialty units from maybe some of the fiefs of Gondor that have their own like local troops.
Right.
And then on the Mordor side, I got to make use of some of their allies of the men of the East. So Khand and Rune and those sort of troops with their own unique aesthetic.
Right.
And then vary up some of the orcs because in the game there's quite a bit of variety and quite a bit of options, and I wanted to try to make use of a lot of those so that it didn't just feel like the same the same warband throughout each
Yeah.
commander.
Right. And I think it's been a while since I've read the books, but in the books, you got that sense from those final battles around Mordor. There were all sorts of different types of characters in those armies.
Yeah, yeah,
So you reflected that. And then how did you decide to break those 170, for example, down in underneath those commanders? Were they pretty evenly split, or did some commanders have a little
yeah.
larger contingents?
So it was based on a few things. Partially, it was based on the way that sort of the points values work out in the game. So I wanted to keep things relatively balanced, so that one warband wouldn't just get stomped by another one.
Yeah.
But that didn't. That wasn't completely how I did it. I kept some of the more important commanders would have stronger warbands. For example, Faramir, the commander of the Gondor
Uh-huh.
side, and then Gothmog on the Mordor side, I gave them a bit of a stronger warband to sort of reflect that they were the commanders and they got the elite troops. Um, but for example, the player who had the trolls on Mordor's side had a pretty small warband. It was like 7 or so,
Right.
um,
Okay.
whereas
Yeah.
most other commanders would have at least like 15. So I really the reason that was there is to reflect that these trolls would be a big force multiplier and that they could take on multiple troops at the same time.
So how did the planning? Because this is a individual warrior based, I guess would be a way to say it.
Hmm.
How was the planning conducted, and what did you see there in the planning channels?
Yeah. So on the Gondor side, they found that they were pretty thin on the ground. They didn't have as many troops. They didn't have as many soldiers, and they couldn't really cover all the angles of approach that they needed to. So I found very quickly that what they wanted to do is they wanted to concentrate their forces where they needed them the most.
Right.
And in contrast, on the Mordor side, because they had a pretty decent advantage in numbers, they decided that they could spread out, and so they covered most of the width of their attack zones.
Uh huh.
Um, and so you generally found that players would And because we had these specialized war bands, they focused a lot on how they could sorry, how they could
Mhm.
like complement each other. So if you had, say, Gothmog, their commander, and then the troll commander in the center, they wanted to complement each other by having the trolls, push forward and break up the enemy, and then follow up with their more elite orcs.
Uh-huh.
So I found that in planning, a lot of it came down to figuring out who they wanted to assign where and how much and on the defensive side, how much they thought they could cover.
Okay. And how, because you had many commanders in smaller groups around the commander
Mm-hmm.
from 7 to 15, I think you just mentioned, how
Yeah.
did you find they followed the planning? Did it just kind of devolve into a bit of a brawl, or did the two
Yeah.
sides follow the concept?
So that was pretty interesting because I found that, and especially from the first person perspective of the commanders, the fog of war was pretty strong.
Right.
When you have that first person perspective, it becomes a lot more difficult to figure out where you are uh, in relation to your enemy as well as to your allies. So I think on the Mordor side, things generally, like, the commanders tried to follow the plan as much as possible.
Okay.
They stuck together. They communicated well. On the Gondor side, I noticed that as they broke up and they retreated through, some of those scattered ruins on the table, they sort of lost contact with each other, and they
Right.
had some communication issues there because they just weren't together. They couldn't speak.
Right. And how did you handle that in the game in terms of the ability to speak? I saw quite a few colos in your server. Was it all
Yeah.
basically colos?
So yeah, it's pretty much all co-locations. So
Okay.
when the two commanders are close enough to each other, they're allowed to speak to each other. But I did put some limits on it because in this skirmish format, turns are pretty short. So I limited them to two messages per turn, and I gave them a word cap of, I think, about 25 words.
Okay.
Um, and then, of course, messengers could also be sent, but the problem with messengers is they didn't have like a dedicated messenger, and especially not someone on a horse. So to actually get a runner to bring a message from one person to another could take quite a while.
Yeah.
So a lot
Right.
of the communication came down to actually being in the same spot and speaking with the other commanders.
Which, in the chaos of what was happening in a kind of a fort like that,
Hmm.
fortress like that, that makes sense, right? You're
Yeah.
going to be, it's going to be very chaotic. So talk about the first person. You actually use 3D models.
Yeah.
Um, talk about how you created that, where you got those assets, and how you found that.
Yeah, so most of it was straight off the Steam Workshop.
Okay.
So because Middle Earth strategy battle game is a commercially produced rule set, there are people who have wanted to play it on Tabletop Simulator.
Hmm.
So you can find modules online with every single model for this game put onto TTS and 3D modeled.
Okay.
So I basically went online and I found them, and I took them, and I took the models that I wanted and I put them straight in. The table, um, the table was partially what inspired me to run the game because I was browsing through the Steam Workshop and I found it, um, just sort of there, and it's a pretty big table, bigger
Yeah.
than most tables that have been made for this game. And I said, well, hey, maybe I could run a Kriegsspiel on
Right.
that because it's big enough to support the format. And I already sort of had this idea, but that finding that map gave me a bit more inspiration to be like, okay, I can really
Yeah.
do
Right.
this.
So talk about that for those umpires who haven't really jumped into finding commercial assets and things like that.
Hmm.
Talk about what did you have? Did you have to buy something with it, or how did that work?
Yeah. So for me, it was pretty simple because I went on the Steam Workshop page. So, you go on Steam, you go into Tabletop Simulator, and you go to the Workshop tab, and you can find all these publicly available mods that people have made.
Right.
And for me, it was simply just searching up like Middle Earth strategy battle game or uh, Middle Earth, etc. Finding those assets which were free. You
They
just
were
found
free. Okay, good for
the
you.
module and subscribe to them, and then from there finding the map, and that was also free.
Oh wow.
It's all on the Steam Workshop, so it's all community made, and you don't have to pay for any of it.
Oh great. Okay, I think newer umpires don't know that there's a tremendous amount of assets inside Steam that, and like we
Yeah,
just talked
yeah.
about, that you can use to. One of my early games with James, we did a BattleTech, and he had all the mechs and everything. So
Yeah, if people are looking to adopt like a more commercial rule set or a board that they think they could find like for a board game, like most of those are available on Steam for free.
right, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I found a few myself for sure. So taking a commercial rule set, bringing it over, you found these assets on TTS or Steam. You're able to
hmm
import it in. What does it inspire you now to make your own version, or you think you got it to where you wanted to get it, or because we all like to fiddle
Yeah.
with our rule sets, right?
Yeah. I don't think I necessarily want to make my own rule set, but I think there's definitely more things I want to improve about the current rule set. Um,
Yeah, talk through some of the ideas you have.
Yeah, so it's sort of in a bit of the early stages, but I took some notes
Mhm.
on the server itself. I have a little channel where as I'm going, it's just private, only I can see it. But
I
as
do
I'm
that too.
going,
Yeah, I call it design
yeah,
notes, and I put in notes that things I see. That's a good idea.
as I'm going, I take a look and I say, hey, I like this or I don't like this, and I sort of workshop some changes. Um,
That's a great thing, because when the game ends, you have this relief of like, oh, it's
yeah.
over and it went perfectly. But if you go back into that channel, you can see when there were pinch points that you notice in the middle of it, and you can
hmm
really improve your play. But go ahead.
So one of the big things I noticed, and this I sort of allowed partway through the game, is that players wanted to use the Discord React function in the co-location channels. So it would be like, they'd tell you, commander would give their orders to one of their subordinate players, and both of their players had used both their messages, and it would be simple as clicking like thumbs up or whatever.
Right.
But that was just like a quality of life thing that I
Yeah.
found I added, and I want to include that in my rule set next time because I don't know if it was exactly very clear to the players.
So you think you
Um,
want to not allow it or allow it?
I want to allow it.
To allow it. Yeah. Yeah. Makes
Yeah.
sense.
And I also noticed that I want to improve the mobility of some of the lighter elements compared to sort of the heavier armored troops because I noticed there wasn't much of a movement disparity between the two. And I
Okay.
want skirmishers to be more able to move and outpace more like heavier elements.
Okay. Got it.
Those are
Good.
just two of the things I found in my notes,
Yeah,
but
that's great. No,
yeah.
right now those notes are there, and you can experiment with them on the next go. What
hmm
now I noticed you said it at night, right? Because it was dark. What
Yeah,
what are your thoughts about that? Would you do that again, or how did that work out?
yeah. I don't know if I would do that again. Now that was the way it was in the book and in the movies,
Right.
so I felt like I had to translate that over.
Right.
Um, Now I liked it in the game because it limited the Gondor team's ability to just pepper Mordor with arrows and shoot them off the board before they even got into combat.
Right.
And I didn't want that to be the play experience, so I set it at night. I turned down the brightness on the TTS thing to
Yep.
limit visibility somewhat, but really I applied it in game mechanics as giving a lot of penalties to shooting beyond certain ranges,
Okay.
and that helped some of the maybe riskier parts of Mordor team's attack to not be a complete disaster when it came to the game. But in the future, I think if I ever do run a game at night again, I want to really make sure I have a clear set of rules for that I can follow, because as I was going, it was more of a free spiel
Right.
application of the rules. But if I ever do that again, I want to give myself a more concrete thing uh,
Yeah.
to work with.
Fair enough. Now, with 17-ish players,
Hmm.
you were doing first person, so you had to maneuver the camera angle
Yeah.
behind where the commander was. How much time did it take you to resolve or collect those images?
So yeah, that's a good question. So it would take me, I'd resolve the turn, and once I got quicker at it, it was maybe like 30 or 40 minutes. It didn't
Okay.
take me too long to
That's not
actually
bad.
do the turn. Um, and when I would go to do the players, I'd switch over to a different color on TTS, the spectator thing, so I couldn't highlight anything and I wouldn't mess up the screenshots.
Yeah.
Um, and I'd change my camera to first person and I'd go down. And it didn't take me too long, um, because as I was resolving, I knew where each player was and I just had to go find them. Um, and
Yeah.
on Mac at least, there's a hotkey that lets you uh, set up like a screenshot it'll take a screenshot of a certain part of your computer, not the whole
Right.
thing, but
Right.
just
Right.
a certain
I have a
section.
Max. I know I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I could just do that and, hit that key, hit enter, and I'd get a screenshot. And I just had to do that,
So you just had to
well,
maneuver to
17
where you
times.
knew that part of your screen was the
Yeah.
correct shot, and then hit that one key.
So actually, most of the time I spent doing that was finagling some of the screenshots to make sure that players were getting the information I wanted to give them from the screenshot.
Right.
Because
Right.
in first person, that's kind of tough sometimes. And I mean, sometimes I'd give them two screenshots, but
Yeah.
it didn't really take me that long at all. I'd say tops like 5 minutes.
Okay. And then writing wise, how long did you add on? So if you got it down to 30 minutes to take the shots, how long did you get to write the remainder of it up?
Writing took the most time out of everything.
Sure.
So I'd do the turn in 30 to 40 minutes, take screenshots for 5, take some for the AAR. Later, I started drawing under the models to show which one was in which warband, which I think really improved the viewing experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I would say that writing the reports took me a solid hour or so.
Okay.
Hour to an hour and a half. So all in all, it'd take me about 2 hours to
2
resolve a
hours.
turn.
Okay. And then when
Yeah.
I didn't ask you this earlier, sorry. How many days between turns, real life, did you do it every other day, every third day?
I tried to keep it at around 3 days per turn.
3 days. Okay.
It was two quite a few times. It was four a couple times.
Yeah.
But I would say on average it was 3 days per turn.
But you had a day off in the middle, basically,
Yeah.
from doing it, and then you freshen up for the next day. Okay, so a couple hours. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's good. You got it down to a decent resolution time for the amount of complexity with the first person as well as
Hmm. It
individual soldiers, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah, it really helped that I've played with this rule set. I've played with this rule set a lot.
Okay. Yeah.
In person. Um, the tournament scene in my hometown isn't as good as it was a couple of years ago, but I've played quite a bit, and I know the profiles quite well, so I don't have to constantly open and check my book and see like, oh, what's this thing I need to check, what's this thing I need to check.
Yeah.
I
Right.
know most of it off the top of my head, so that really helped speed up the time.
I think that's a an unsung benefit when you have that much knowledge about resolution and
Hmm.
a rule set. Then you spend all of your time giving the player the experience that you want them to have,
Yeah.
versus trying to figure out a resolution or whatever. So I think that
Hmm.
that's a it's a real benefit if you focus on a period or even do multiple games in a certain type of rule set. Then you just get
Yeah.
faster and you focus on the quality. So that's great. What last lessons on this, and then I want to talk about your wargaming in general. We'll open it up a little bit, but
All right.
this is the first of these we've done right after a game, so I really wanted to dive in while it was fresh with you.
Yeah.
And you think you have another? You head over to Rohan next and see you get
Yep.
Asgard going, or what's the?
Next is probably going to be the battle at the Fords of Ison.
Oh
I'm
boy, there
planning.
you go.
So
There you go. Good for you.
yeah,
And how will you do that? You'll cut that down to a small part of the battle, I imagine. Is that where?
yeah. So a big thing about this system is that it's a skirmish format,
Yeah,
so
right.
you can't cover a full battle. I'll probably cut it down to the action around the ford,
Yeah, right.
and sort of Theodred's stand there. But we'll see how much I can finagle the numbers to include as much of the battle as I can.
Yeah, yeah, and that'll be play by post because, as you said, you can't really use this format for live.
Yeah, this format would not really be very conducive to a live format.
Well, how does it work when you play in a tournament live? Is it?
So for Middle Earth, at least in my local scene, we do 3 round round robin tournaments. So
Yeah,
uh, you'll go in, you'll bring your army. Everyone will decide. There'll be a points level decided on beforehand. So that basically just determines how much you can bring and what you can bring.
yeah,
Everyone shows up, and we play 3 rounds over the course of a day. Each round lasting about 2 to 3 hours, depending on the size of the game. Um,
okay.
Winners play winners, losers play losers, but everyone plays 3 rounds. It's not a single elimination tournament or anything.
But all the die rolling and everything you all do in person when you play each other,
Yeah,
right? Okay.
everything's in person.
Not
So
impossible
it's
to do a
a
live game, although certainly it's just your preference. You want to do a more thoughtful play by post, which is great.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing about running a live game in the format of a Kriegsspiel is that you have so many more players, and you have to
Right.
get to each turn in a reasonable amount of time.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so, like a game of Middle Earth, you might have like 5 turns with your opponent in like 10 minutes because everyone's just walking. There's no fighting, and then turn 7 or 8 takes you like 30 minutes.
Got it. Yeah.
And that
Right.
sort of variance is not really conducive to a live Kriegspiel
Yeah, you
format.
don't have that flexibility where you can slow it down like that.
No.
Got it. Okay. So you do have some more thoughts about other games in the format. How did we find you? How did you come into the Kriegsspiel community?
Oh, that's a good question. It was about we're coming up on a year, I think. Last summer, I was I don't remember if it might have been off YouTube, or I learned about Kriegspiel from I think like a history video or something, and I
Okay.
went around looking up what it was, and I found the IKS website, and I started reading through that because I was really curious about what Kriegspiel was, and I think that's what brought me to the Discord. I
Got
don't
it.
remember exactly, but I think that's what it was.
And have you umpired in any other games or any other formats?
So I've umpired in the newcomers game that
Okay.
James is running.
Yeah. Great.
I've done a few turns in that, and then I've run, as I said, I ran a test game for this system before this.
Yeah.
And then I've run one World War II game using Otovsky's system for a couple friends, but
Yeah.
nothing else on the IKS.
And are you interested in history or fantasy, or what do you read, or what's your personal interest?
Well, I mean, I'm interested in history, but I wouldn't say I know very much about it, especially compared to this community.
Right. Well, that's a high
People,
bar. This community sets a. I thought
yeah,
I knew history, and I came into this group, and I was
and
like,
then you
holy.
don't at all.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
I know my way around a few
Okay.
fantasy worlds. I'd say Lord of the Rings is probably one of the ones I know best,
Well,
and that's why I went to run a game
you
for
were
it.
one of the 4 people who read the Silmarillion, so
Yeah,
so good for you. That's great.
yeah.
All right. Well, the thing is that you can get all the thrill of command. You can get the obviously Great Games Workshop is made a decent living off of this. You get the
Hmm.
thrill of command. You get the fog of war. You can get all the planning bits and all that stuff from fantasy as much as Napoleonic. So if that's your
Hmm.
area of knowledge and interest, there's plenty of folks who would love to play that.
Yeah.
If we look at the whole umpiring experience, now that you've put a couple good games on the board,
Hmm.
from the planning to the setup to the actual execution and the follow up in the end, what's the favorite part of the process for you?
So I really enjoy. I enjoy most of the steps of it. So
Okay.
planning out the battle and sort of figuring out the map and the order of battles, because of the formats, I've had to do most of that myself for my Lord of the Rings games, and I've enjoyed that process of researching and figuring out, which characters were there, what I can include. Um, the worst part is definitely setting up the Discord server.
Yes.
That's it's just slow,
There's no
monotonous
fast
work,
way to
really.
do it.
Nope.
You just have to grind through
But
every
you got to
role,
get it
every
done.
channel. Yeah, no, I'd love to have
Yeah.
a, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's the lead.
Have
I
a
guess
have a quick
that's the
setup or
lead.
something.
So all the parts,
Like if I could,
so all the parts of it are enjoyable in some measure.
yeah.
Okay. Good.
And then of course the
Yeah.
execution. I think just one of the things I really like about the execution is when you're planning, you sort of have an idea of like, okay, I think this is how the battle is going to go, and then your players show up and they change all that completely. They have new ideas. They're like, we're going to do this and this, and you're like, I had no idea you were going to do that.
Oh man,
And
that's
it's
the
it's
difference
it's sort
between
of
a new
interesting.
umpire and an experienced umpire. Is a new umpire says, "This is what I think the game's going to look like." An experienced umpire says, "I have no idea what these guys are going to do.
Yeah.
I have no clue what these guys are going to get up to on this thing." It's great you're doing the newcomer games and you've taken this path and you found an area of interest and as well as knowledge that you have. What advice would you give to a newer umpire who really just stumbled in kind of early days to get started here now that you've got a little experience?
Yeah, I think one of the best ways to learn umpiring is I learned it off the newcomers game. I know James is running a like school of new umpires.
Uh huh.
I'm playing in that game as one of the guinea pig players,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
I assume that that's a good way to start. Um, and I think one of the best things to do is to learn the fundamentals of how to umpire first and then sort of get into your system. So as people have talked about many times before, as I've seen at least, starting off with something simple, Napoleonics, or just something that really gets you the grasp of how to umpire first, and
Yeah.
then after that, I found it was much easier to branch off into something more specialized, like Lord of the Rings, where I was semi-designing the system and running it myself.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
It's good. Just see the patterns and get the flow of it, and then when you umpire,
Hmm.
you realize you've seen it all before in a way. Then you have to just figure out how to get Discord set up. So
Yeah.
cool. That's great. How could we? What would you like to see to make the support of umpires or just this umpire club, if you will, more fun, more engaging, and better? Do you have any ideas about what we could do as umpires to help each other out more?
That's a tough question. Because I think we have a good system for if people have questions, uh, etc. Um,
Hmm.
I haven't seen it as much, and maybe I'm just missing the episodes, but I really do enjoy, the Coffee Kegs and Kriegsspiel podcasts,
Yeah,
or these things where some of the more experienced umpires go over like specific aspects of the game, and how different systems explore that and how they implement that from like a design perspective.
yeah, great. And then we're going to do more of that here on this because now
Yeah.
you actually have shared from the beginning of basically your inspiration by being in Steam and seeing the assets all the way through to how you adapted that rule set. People are going to glean insights from what you've told us today, and
Hmm.
so everybody has a little bit of a different approach. Um,
Yeah.
I think Red Baron, we talked to him, and he did a skirmish game. He did a World War II skirmish game. And you've got a skirmish game, and I know Pete the Elder does skirmish games. So
Yeah, he
skirmish
does.
games, some people love them, some people less so. But really, Kriegsspiel in a skirmish format is a super interesting thing because
Hmm.
skirmishing is all about chaos, and you can certainly create it in a Kriegsspiel.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
terrific. Well, fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on, and
Yeah.
we've had a great chat.
I
Um,
appreciate you having me.
Second Battle of Osgiliath, you did a really great job on it, and I look forward to the next game. We'll all have a look at the next one. Hopefully, get some spectators in there watching how you pull
Yeah.
that one together.
We'll see.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.